And those of you who read The Australian will know Judith Sloan very well as the most incisive economic commentator on that newspaper. You may not know that she has a very illustrious career as an academic, as a director on the board of some of our major companies, and also, surprisingly enough, as a representative on a number of government-owned bodies, including she was deputy chairman of the Australian Broadcasting Commission.
Achieved nothing.
Well, that remains to be seen. So it's my pleasure to ask Judith Sloan to speak to you.
Thanks very much, Tony. And I don't want to speak for too long because I'm sure you really want to ask Kay lots of questions because it's an absolutely fascinating topic. And actually, well, certainly in the circles that I move, we've taken a really big interest in the election of Trump, and of course the timing of it was very good from our point of view because it was during the day when the election results were coming in, so
lucky
we didn't have to
we
stay.
couldn't sleep that night.
No, it was fabulous. And I was just saying to Kay that there is one aspect of the Trump election which I'm really enjoying, and that's all those exploding heads amongst the disappointed commentators and others. I just thought I'd throw out a few thought bubbles in a sense because it's really not a topic that I'm inclined to speak about. Do I think of myself as a feminist? I guess being a sort of an analytical academic, I kind of think, well, you know, how do you define feminist? And I'm probably very inclined to fudge that issue, to tell you the truth. I'm definitely not the kind of man-hating feminist or anti-man feminist, which I think has become quite a common, maybe just a subgroup of feminism. If that defines feminism, you can count me out. I guess I see myself very much as a professional who wants to be judged on the merit of my work. I guess that's quite a feminist thing to say, isn't it? I think so. But I mean, I guess everyone here would probably agree with that. I don't want any special favours. I don't want any special favours because I'm a woman. Don't know. I might be about to be booted from the club. I don't, by and large, go to women-only functions. I find them very saccharine and very self-serving and pointless, by the way. I don't think I should speak on behalf of other women, to tell you the truth, any more than I should speak on behalf of people whose names begin with J, you know. So my experience is my experience, and I think it's very arrogant, really, for even professional women to start trying to speak on behalf of other women. And maybe that was the trap that, you know, your gender studies journalists fell into, that they did feel that they had some authority to not just speak on behalf of other women, but also to have some sort of assumed a view of what they assumed would be their political positions. I mean, I do come from Kay doesn't want me to say bossy, evidently bossy's out. But, you know, I do come from a very long line of bossy, or shall we call it assertive women. There are a few people here who've known me for a long time, including Andrew Norton there. But that's okay. But I think, you know, it's a long line of assertive women who deal very constructively and cooperatively with lots of men. So that's sort of how I see the world, but basically have done what I want to do all my life. I do understand, of course, that many women are not in that position, but I don't think I can offer them much, certainly at a personal level from my own experience. And I think that's an interesting dilemma, really, and I think it's an increasing dilemma for academics, to tell you the truth. And I think not so much in the science, but definitely in the social sciences and the humanities. I think the people with conservative views are being increasingly marginalised and made to feel very uncomfortable. I was telling Kay that just before the event started, I was talking to my colleague at the Australian. We're trying to organise a conference at the university, and the rule is basically you can't have a panel which doesn't have a woman. And so our Vice-Chancellor, who happens to be a man, but, you know, what the heck, he won't appear on a panel unless there's a woman on the panel too. So I was saying to him, they'll have to put me on the panel, which may be not what they had in mind, but there we go. So, yeah, and I mean, I think the other interesting point of Kate McGregor's example is, I mean, how vicious and how exclusionary the new feminism is. And I think I would call it the new feminism. I think it's moved away from what were completely legitimate concerns about the unequal treatment of women in the workforce and in other spheres of life. And I agree. I think that continues to be a completely legitimate area of concern. But this has moved on from this. This is like, if you don't agree with me, I'm going to try and damage you, and you're definitely not going to be part of this privileged set. I was just going to talk, because it's interesting in the corporate world too. There's what I'd call, and I guess I can speak here because this is probably make me unpopular, but there's a bit of a sisterhood in the corporate world. They tend not to hold what I would regard as the both legal and appropriate view of the role of a company director, which is to act in the best interests of the company and the shareholders, which is actually the view, not just the view, which is actually set down in the Corporations Act, that they would regard their role as being much broader than that they would think that it is appropriate to bring social policy issues to the board table. And we've seen this debate, I guess, in the context of the letter written by a series of mainly chief executives, but there were a few chairs of companies or chairs of Australian Super, you know, writing a letter to our Prime Minister and telling them that he must implement same-sex marriage legislation, and if he doesn't, it's bad for business. I never got that bit of the story, but there we go. The sisterhood very much, if you look at the women who are on boards, it's a kind of quite a small coterie, and they look after themselves quite well. And they, don't get me wrong, I mean, I think not everyone is in this category. And I was saying to Kay that I think 20 years ago, when some of the women first got on the board, they were absolutely outstanding because they had been trailblazers. You know, they had been people who'd got to very senior positions, and you know, in the context of that history, that was kind of important. But the sisterhood now, I think, they shuffle important positions and they don't have any reservation about bringing social policy issues to bear. They'll also bring up research which shows you that companies with more women on their board do better than companies that don't have it. Now just think that through. So it's basically saying, well, we could sack half the men off the board, get women, well, we'll just kind of walk down to Burke Street, I think, put them on, and then the performance of the company will improve dramatically. Now you think about that, you think this just can't be the case. And that if you look at the careful research, there may be a causation that runs the other way, which is that very well-performing companies think it's okay to put, and not that I'm necessarily against this, some perhaps inexperienced women on the board. That's fine. But, you know, let's not think that there's some sort of determinative causation which runs from the proportion of women on the board of directors to the performance of the company. It also, of course, completely misunderstands the role of a board of directors. I mean, the managers are running the bloody thing. And, of course, you know, it's the circumstances of the industry which will largely determine the performance of the company. So, but it's one of those things, Kay, which they build up as paradigms, I think. So that's one. The gender wage gap is another. You know, you'll see that put out that it's 73%. And then when you try to explain to them, well, okay, here we go, we have to control for hours of work, we have to control for occupation. In fact, if you look at the careful research that's done in Australia, it shows you this, that towards the bottom end of the wage distribution, women do better than men. The group that does worse in the Australian labour market are ill-educated men. And they are doing worse and worse because the way the economy is transforming, there are fewer and fewer jobs for them. The men who earn very high rates of pay tend to work extremely long hours, and it is effectively a return for being available 24/7, right? And it's actually a job that most of us would not want, okay? It's actually a job that most men don't want, to tell you the truth. So now, you might rail against that self-selection, but that is what you can see in terms of the wage distribution. I'll just end on this point, because when you were talking about this, a lot of it will come, and I see that darling little baby there, that you see women are racked by false consciousness. That's a sort of gender studies term, isn't it?
It's a Marxist term.
Sorry?
It's a
Marxist term, okay, even worse. Okay, so, you know, that women don't know what they really want, and they're then, you know, conditioned to basically subjugate themselves to traditional roles, and that has economic consequences. Whereas, you know, I mean, my children are grown up, and I've now got 4 grandchildren who I spend a lot of time with. Most of the women I know, and most of us have had children, have done precisely what we've wanted to do, which is to drive a balance between caring for our children and pursuing our professional careers at the same time. That has not been an act of false consciousness. That has been a completely voluntary act, which we look into our hearts and we know that is what we wanted to do, and we look back and we don't have any regrets. The trouble is that you try and argue that point, you just end up, it's a dialogue of the deaf. But it's probably worthwhile opening it up for discussion. It's great to see lots of women here, by the way. You're probably all bossy too.